Today we'll focus on the topic of student visa and study permit, particularly students who are coming to Canada to study longer than 7 months, right?
Yeah.
So right now it has been more like right now more Thai students actually become more interested in coming to Canada to study.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons is because of the opportunity to immigrate here.
Yes.
So sometimes students just think that they can just come to Canada to study anything. Like, can I come to study this? Can I come to study this? I just wondering, like, can you say anything on the aspect of immigration? Like, if they
Yeah.
are applying for study permit, do they need to plan, or can they just come to study anything in Canada?
Yeah, of course. So first of all, any student or tourist or a worker can study at a college or language school. Any program that are less than 6 months duration, they don't need study permits specifically. But any program that are longer than 6 months, you do need a study permit.
Right.
And for immigration especially, generally we look at the DLI list and try to pick or recommend schools that are postgrad work permit eligible. This is generally, I mean, it depends on the province too, but especially in Ontario, this is generally public colleges. So my recommendation would definitely be, if your goal is to immigrate in the future, make sure that the college that you're going to is a postgrad work permit eligible college, and that generally is identified as public colleges.
We talk about PGWP eligibility.
Yeah.
How about the area of study? Like, shall they plan, shall they review and consider the background and make the study plan that it makes sense, or they can just choose anything not related to their background?
Yeah, so especially for immigration and PGWP specifically, the specific program is not as important as the college that you attend to and the duration of your program. So basically, if you choose a 1-year program, you may get up to 1 year work permit upon graduation. And if you choose any program that are longer than 2, 3, or 4 years, then you may be eligible for up to 3 years of work permit. Of course, while you're applying for the study permit, having a good study plan is very important. The immigration officer should really understand and agree that it is very right for you to study that specific program. So a program, if you have, for example, a undergrad degree, then maybe a postgrad program where you can actually add on some knowledge, that would be a good program to study. Or, for example, you can be a banker for 5 years and now you want to become a baker, or culinary, if you want to study culinary. Then maybe you can also explain in your study plan that you have been working in this industry for 5 years, and now after 5 years you realize that this program is not exactly what you're looking for, and if you have enough and sufficient funds to support your stay in Canada, then studying a 2-year diploma program for culinary arts could also make sense. So it definitely depends on the student, the interests of the student, and the objective of the student upon graduation.
So it can be either way. One of the way is that they study something a bit more in depth, or maybe to become more specialized in the field of their current employment.
Yes, correct.
For example, they have a background in computer programming. They want to become specialized in cyber security, right? That is add on to their background.
Yeah, and I find that's great in colleges, because in university we're always used to studying general programs like computer science. Yes, but upon graduation, what does a computer science graduate do? Versus in college, you can study back-end, front-end, mobile application, game development, cyber security, as you mentioned. Maybe even crypto nowadays is very popular. So yeah, you can definitely have more specialized education, and upon graduation you actually have a tangible knowledge, skill set, even experience, maybe if the program is co-op, which is work experience. Yeah.
Right. And the other way is maybe change the field of career, like to change the career path. It's also possible. However, I wanted to ask you about one of the things that maybe the immigration will consider, which is like career progression.
Yeah.
Sometimes maybe clients or students have a background in, for example, business and their own business, and they want to maybe study culinary or baking and pastry, or maybe even like something related to health science, right?
Yeah.
I think it's possible, but they might need to be careful in terms of how they explain their rationale and like I mean, under the context or circumstance, what would you advise them to prove in terms of the career progression?
Yeah, you're very correct. The immigration officer definitely wants to make sure that the program selection of the student is not just for status, not just for to receive a postgrad work permit and potentially eventually become immigrants. It has to be solely like the sole reason for your study is to get this study and maybe potentially work experience. And you should mention in your study plan that upon graduation, if you go back to your own country, how will you use what you already learned in your own country and in the field? Of course, if the government gives you the right for a 3-year work permit and you choose to stay, that's completely fine. But you should have a clear plan of, in case you go back to your country, what will be your next steps are. You have to clearly identify these in your study plan. Yeah, any type of supporting documents that you can add on definitely strengthens your application. So as you mentioned, that could be maybe many job openings in IT sector in Thailand that is known and it was public and it was on newspaper. Maybe you can put a link of that and explain more of that. Or maybe if it's correlated to your current work or maybe a family business, then you can try to explain how exactly it's correlated and how you will use this skill set in your own business. Yeah, any type of support that you can use. Maybe yeah, the pay ranges, if they are public in government's website in your country, you can definitely put those wages, and you can also mention your current wage and you say, yeah, this is what I want to study and get international experience, and this will also make my English speaking skills better, and you will get to see another country and how the market works in this specific country, and you will definitely be ahead of your peers who stayed in Thailand.
Let's move on to the funding, right?
Yeah.
So the other aspect when the officer look at the visa application, they also look at the money, right? The
Of
funds.
course, yeah.
So how much fund is required really to have an applicant to obtain visa successfully?
Yeah, as you mentioned, the visa officer, the immigration officer generally looks at two things. One, your study plan makes sense, or maybe three things. And then when you come to Canada, will you do something illegal, maybe stay illegal, or will you just be a legal resident?
Yeah.
And lastly, how are you going to pay your 4th month's rent? And for that, they want to see some liquid funds. There could be two different funds. One is maybe your assets, it can be your house, it can be your car, and these will tie you and your grounds to your country. So these are good reasons for you to go back to your country and not do anything illegal in Canada. But secondly, you also need some liquid funds to prove that your month-to-month expenses will be covered. Generally, regardless of your program length, the Canadian government wants to make sure that at least 1 year of expenses are already reserved in your bank account. And of course, a student or maybe a husband can work part-time or maybe full-time during scheduled breaks, maybe a summer break. And a student who works part-time, even at a Starbucks, and I say even because this is minimum wage, can maybe make up to $1,000. So in a year, if you add these up with the full-time work experiences, this can make maybe $16,000. But the government doesn't want to depend on this and wants to make sure that while you're leaving your country, you do have these funds in your bank account. Unfortunately, there's no minimum funds required, and it's shared with the students or applicants. It's more important that you understand what will be your expenses and try to tell the officer that what you have will be enough for your to cover all your tuition fees, maybe rent, maybe your other monthly expenses such as food. And if you make a simple calculation that public college is around maybe $15,000 to $19,000, and then your rent probably will be around $1,500, maybe $2,000 even, and then your monthly expenses will be minimum $500, but it can even be up to maybe $1,500 or more.
Right.
So if you add these up for 12 months, in total this comes to $45,000 Canadian dollars for one person, and maybe even $55,000 to $60,000 for a couple or maybe a family. Of course, for a one person, if you have $38,000, you still can be eligible, but you do need to prove to the officer that this is your plan, this is your income that you will keep receiving maybe while you're in Canada. You will receive it from Thailand, and if it makes sense to the officer, then it's fine. But if you only have, for example, $25,000, and if your program is $18,000, you only have $7,000 left. So now the officer might be thinking, after fourth month, how will the students pay their bills? And also for students too, I think it gives you a very good clarity if you can come with maybe $45,000 mark funds. Otherwise, the students are also very stressed, and they have to find jobs that they don't necessarily want to work at, and they can't really enjoy or get the full experience, the full potential from studying abroad. And one final hint is when we provide financial documents, we generally try to provide the last 6 months of funds. The officers generally wants to see the last 6 months because they want to make sure that you didn't sell your house and put $40,000 last month, because this will mean that one, you don't have the necessary funds, and two, you're selling your ties to Thailand. Then maybe you will stay or extend your stay in Canada without notifying the Canadian government. And two, if you're getting a loan from the bank, like they can't really double check that, or maybe a family member if you're getting a loan. So if a fund is in your account, and this is not an account where you spend 1,000 a month and then receive 2,000 that month, like it shouldn't be an active account. You have to prove to the officer that this account is there and available and reserved for the last 6 months for my studies in Canada. I do not need these funds to pursue my life in Thailand. This truly showcases that this amount is actually reserved for your studies. The funds should be analyzed and expenses should be analyzed, and then it should be mentioned to the officer with a special plan. Because, for example, I know some of your students, maybe they have a Canadian aunt, or maybe they have a family member or a friend who are in Canada, and they will open their houses or their room to this particular student. So this will reduce your yearly expense by maybe $15,000 to $20,000. So now you don't maybe need 45,000, but maybe you need 30,000 or 25,000. And also the program you go to, if it's a private college, then maybe your education expenses are not 18,000, but maybe they're only 7,000. So again, this 45,000 can be adjusted accordingly. And finally, you also mentioned to the sponsor point. Yeah, the money or the funds does not have to be under the student's name. The funds can be under a parent's name or a family friend's name. But the problem with a friend is you really have to explain to the officer why this friend is giving you that money, which sometimes it can be a bit hard because it cannot be a loan. It shouldn't be a loan. It should be your funds, or those expenses should be reserved for your education. But if another person's funds will be used, so that means that person will be your financial sponsor, maybe a letter of financial support, or maybe I know you guys take affidavit, that also is a good idea. And maybe also provide a passport page copy of that person, and maybe a signature of that person to to prove that that person is actually doing this willingly. If the funds are limited, let's say maybe $40,000, but the program that is intended to study is 2-year program, maybe try to switch the program to a 1-year program. And you can always do a 1+1, meaning without extending your scheduled break. If you study another 1-year program on top of your 1-year program, this is also considered as 2-year program. And again, upon graduation of your second program, you can still be eligible for up to 3 years work permit. But the idea there is you should not apply for postgrad work permit after your first education, because postgrad work permit, you can only receive it once in your lifetime. So while you can receive this once, if you, for example, from your first 1-year program, when you graduate, if you feel like you already have a job and you already get accustomed to the culture in Canada and your English speaking levels are great, then maybe sure, you can graduate and apply for the postgrad work permit. But if you still feel like you're not ready to start your work experience, you still are not feeling really confident with your English levels, or you want to study more, then maybe do study your second program, and upon graduation try to apply for the 3-year work permit.
Other two quick questions. One about study plan.
Yeah.
Is it important? Will the officer read it? And also, can they have someone else write it for you or for them?
Yeah, so first of all, study plan should be written by the student. It should be students' genuine education plan and upon graduation their potential work plan. And maybe their background and the funds and everything that the student wants to mention. Of course, study plans are important. It will clarify a lot of things regarding your application, but at the same time, there is a reality that there are so many applicants, but maybe not enough immigration officers. That's why sometimes an application can take 3 weeks to review, or sometimes 1.5, or even up to 2 months to be reviewed, especially during COVID. So if you consider that the immigration officer has 15 minutes in total to review your application, you really have to be clear with your application. You have to be organized with your application. And you need to be clear and concise with your study plan as well. Because officer cannot read a 7, 10, 15 page study plan. Maybe try to identify most important parts and have it summarized in 2, 3, 4 pages, maybe 5 pages with pictures if you want to put. These are all things to be considered. And with the application as well, other than the study plan, as I mentioned, it should be well organized. It should potentially important parts can be circled in red to get the attention of the officer to that particular part. Or if the officer is expected to change to the next page because the next page will have the answer to the question, then it should be clearly identified and showcased with an arrow maybe, or a little note saying, please look at the next page, there will be the answer of the question that you may be looking for. And for us as immigration consultants, we try to minimize the question marks that the officer might have and really try to explain the application, the funds, the reasoning behind the program of study and the study plan, where the student will stay, in maybe 3 to 5 minutes. Doesn't have to take 15 minutes sometimes. Yeah.
Students who are accepted into public institution programs,
Yeah.
and they may still be having the condition with the English language requirement. So they may be studying ILAC online programs
Yeah.
in particular. And can they use the conditional letter of acceptance to apply for visa first, or should they clear the condition first and then apply for visa?
Yeah, first of all, there are different parameters that an officer looks when they are understanding your application. So I feel like the less parameters there are, the easier the application will be. So if you have a lot of conditions, if your financials are not clear, if your study plan is not clear, if your program of selection or the start date is not clear, sometimes this can be considered as maybe a negative look by the officer. But generally, especially if your language program is not too long, for example, 2 months, 4 months, maybe 6 months, and if you mention that you do have an acceptance letter from ILAC, maybe ILAC is paid, or maybe the college afterwards is paid to show your interest and motivation behind the academic program, then definitely the application can be made and it can be considered positively. As long as your maybe current IELTS, Duolingo or English test result is provided, a clear letter from the language school stating that it will take 6 months, and upon graduation this is the new LOA where the student is going to continue, plus the student already paid half the fees for the next program. This really strengthens the application. And yeah, I would advise students to proceed with these applications. When students come, as long as they don't start their academic program yet, if they're studying still the language portion of the program, they cannot study yet. They can start studying when they start their academic program. This is especially start working when they start the academic program. This is especially challenging for the spouse, because generally when we apply for the study permit, if there's a spouse, we also apply for the work permit for the spouse. But if the student is coming for a language program, sometimes we do have to apply for a tourist visa for the spouse. And upon start of the academic program for the student, then we try to convert the spouse's permit to a work permit. But this does take time. So to have everything more organized and in a timely manner. And if you really want to be sure of your status from the get-go before coming to Canada, because maybe you do need to work in Canada immediately when you come, then we do recommend trying to apply for the study permit after finishing the language program. And especially programs like I Like KISS or online language programs, they are a good alternative to studying in Canada, because you won't be paying rent, you won't have Canadian dollar expenses, and you will try to better your English and get to the level of the college program while you're still in your country and potentially still working.